Committee of the Los Angeles City Council. Wednesday afternoon, I'm joined by the Vice Chair, Councilmember Jose Huizar, and members Mike Bonin and Curran Price. We have a relatively short agenda with some key questions that we want to, and key discussions that we want to put on the public record. But we'll begin the meeting with public comment. I have two public comment cards. One from Antonia Ramirez and the other from Joe Camel. You'll be given a minute to speak. And anybody who has a public comment card, I'd ask you to get it in right away as we will proceed through the meeting without that.
Yeah, so remember, for all your printing needs, PDQ Publishers of Inglewood. Anyway, what do we have here? General Jeff is not here today. Now you're setting him up and having him arrested for some crappy charge. We need General Jeff in these meetings. General Jeff, man, doing good work for the people. He did everything you asked. He did everything you asked. He even went against you-know-who in favor of you-know-who, and you have him arrested by the police. So you see what happens? You get into bed with the man bones you. You see what I mean? So you got to be able to keep your distance between those on that side of the fence and over here on our side of the fence. So remember, PDQ Publishers for all your printing needs.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, as you already know, I'm a victim of gang stalking. I still haven't found out who is behind it, but I am homeless. And yesterday I was resting at the park by the Iron Gate, and I fell asleep, and some jackass, whether it be a wetback or whoever, stole my purse, and I had to file a police report. They stole over $500 that I had in my purse. And this is something that we go through every frickin' day, at night and day. If it ain't the blacks, yes, blacks. I have blacks gang stalking me everywhere I go. I wish Oprah would follow me. But most is the Latinos and the wetbacks and the gangbangers. Every movement I make, I am followed, even in the toilet. I'm fed up, I'm frustrated, and again, you see gang stalking on the internet. Please look, Ted Gunderson, retired ex-FBI agent on YouTube. It is torture, it is painful, it is invasive, and it feels you just want to scream and, oh, God help us, whoever's being gang stalked.
Thank you. So, Mr. Clerk, we'll start with item number 2, if you could read that into the record.
Certainly, Mr. Chair. Item number 2 is a budget motion relative to the instruction for the Economic and Workforce Development Department to report on the numbers and population covered by LA Rise. Mr. Chair, EWDD submitted a report dated June 7, 2016, which is before the committee.
Excellent. And we have from EWDD the one and only Mr. Robert Sines, Assistant General Manager, joined by colleagues.
Good afternoon. With me is Ashley from REDF, who's our managing partner of the overall grant. So if I could give a couple minutes about the federal grant that we received and then our plans for the additional $2 million that were allocated through the budget. First of all, I want to say thank you for the allocation to this very, very important project, because I think you'll find it as one strategy that we are pushing folks from unemployment and homelessness into employment and housing. So the grant that we actually received was a Department of Labor grant for $6 million. The $6 million was to do two major things. One was to move at least 500 individuals from unemployment to employment, very specifically that were formerly homeless. This is folks coming from a reentry population as well as folks that were coming from the homeless population, often intertwined. The second was to really build a system of care that took the best work that we were doing in workforce development along with the best work that was being done with the housing community. And what knitted that together was social enterprises. I'll have REDF give their background and how they approach this project, but utilizing social enterprises and subsidized employment that move folks from 100% subsidy to 100% placement in the private market. Right now, we've had the first year in planning. The good news to report that we have over 275 folks receiving services currently, an additional 200 plus individuals in the control group. And this has a national evaluation as well as a local evaluation component. I'll stop right here and ask Ashley to give you a little background on REDF and their contributions to the project.
Thank you. So REDF's experience is in providing funding and consulting-like services to social enterprises. We define that as a nonprofit organization that has a business arm. You've probably all heard of Homeboy Industries. So it provides paid transitional employment opportunities to individuals in addition to personal readiness and soft skills development. What this project does is it integrates that paid workforce experience with the expertise of the WorkSource centers. So we're taking the expertise of both organizations to help one individual go through this employment pathway.
And for the $2 million for the general fund grant, we originally proposed for 200 individuals. The good news is that after we crunched the numbers and able to look for cost savings within the original $2 million budget, we actually are now projected to serve 275. So we're going to be much more cost effective with the general fund dollars because we've paid for a lot of the planning, the infrastructure work, and the evaluation through the federal funding. We also plan to utilize our set of contractors and contracts that are in place. So July 2nd, we could actually start bringing in individuals and move this fairly quickly. We talked about Homeboys. If you give me a chance, I'll give all the partners. But we have Homeboys, Alley Conservation Corps, New Ways, no, I'm sorry, Chrysalis, Downtown Women's Center, ARC, and I'm missing a couple.
CRCD, Goodwill are the other two social enterprise partners. We have 3 personal support agencies that provide really hands-on retention services. So when someone is in that second stage of employment, they still are in need of really hands-on case management. So that's Lyft, Family Services, ARC, and Friends Outside.
Very good. And then lastly, we do have 11 employers that have committed already to do the hiring. So from our very first cohort, there's about a dozen folks that have transitioned into full-time, non-subsidized employment. We have already 80 commitments from these 11 employers to take on the additional folks when they're ready. So we're happy to answer any questions that you might have from the committee.
Questions, colleagues? Mr. Price?
Sounds like an exciting opportunity. I'm curious, the organizations are going to be required to do just general placement? Are they going to be receiving the individuals? They're going to be doing the training? What's the role of the organizations? What roles are they going to be playing?
So the social enterprises are responsible for providing the paid work experience and the personal readiness. They each have a matched WorkSource partner who does the job readiness piece. So interview prep, resume building, job fairs, also connecting to more vocational training like diesel mechanic or truck driving services. And together they do the placement with the secondary employers.
So we were bringing the best of each of the systems together with the focus of doing and moving them to the labor market. The other question that was presented by the committee during budget was connected to the 5,000 positions that we're looking within the city to hire. So we were in deep conversations with Jackie Goldberg and Teresa Sanchez to actually utilize this pool of individuals as one of the first cohorts to come into the vocational worker positions. Their process in terms of hiring for those 5,000 are still being worked out, but we do want to have this program as well as our other publicly subsidized programs to be the first priority.
And this is, Mr. Chairman, and so this is supposed to be a year or 2-year project, or what's the timing on it?
So individuals can stay in transitional employment for up to a year. Most transition around 6 months, and then they're placed into the more permanent employment opportunity.
And our federal grant was a 5-year grant that started last year, so we're in our second year now. The last year is going to be strictly on the evaluation. On the general fund dollars, we plan to start as early in July as possible and run that for the full year.
Mr. Huizar, Mr. Bonin? Excellent. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you, sir.
I have a couple public comment cards on this item. Ms. Ramirez and Mr. Camel.
Yeah, $6 million to get 500 people out to jobs? Well, let's do some math. 200 people get $10,000 each. That's $2 million. $6 million would help 500 clients. So that means you're going to help 500 people, but where the other $1 million going to go? In your pocket. So you mean $6 million to help only 500 means there's an extra $1 million, and the extra $1 million is your tip. In Spanish, it's called propina. You get a propina for helping the 500 for the $6 million. Yeah, I think that's wonderful. $6 million. Ooh, I love federal funds, don't you? Especially when it's free.
We have a multifaceted homeless problem. You've got a drug homeless problem. You've got a homeless military problem. You've got victims of crime and gang stalking homeless problem. And then you've got mental homeless problems. You can't lump them all together and put them under the same tent. It doesn't work. You're going to get it in a chaotic that it's going to overspill and infect the rest of the city, the community, and all others. What you need to do is close those in and adequately provide housing to those groups of individuals according to their needs. Like the crimes of victims, you put them in a special area that will help them keep away from criminal deviants. Military veterans, again, you place them immediately in military homes. Again, you place these individuals accordingly, but you do not lump them together. I don't have anything with the junkie, nor they with me, and it's not fair. Thank you.
So thank you all for your presentations. Mr. Clerk, will note and file number 2. And I would ask you to now read number 3 and 5, which we'd like to consider together.
Okay, sir. Certainly, sir. Item number 3 is a budget motion relative to the instruction for the LA Homeless Service Agency to report on the breakdown of how the fiscal year 2016-17 funding will be allocated, including a breakdown of programming versus administrative costs. While item number 5 is a budget motion relative to the consideration of appropriate funding allocations for LASA and other budgetary allocation as appropriate contained in the homeless budget.
Public comment first. Thank you. So we're going to take public comment first, and we'll ask you all to come to the desk while we're doing that. I have, again, Mr. Camel. As the only public speaker on item 3.
We're doing item 5 or 3?
You have 2 minutes because you can speak on 3 and 5.
Oh, okay. Resetting the clock. All right. So 3, skipping 4 and 5. Well, the problem is I'm so goddamn confused. I don't even know what I'm talking about. Which, okay. It's okay. We don't have to know what we're talking about. This is about free money, free federal dollars. Just getting them dollars 1 million at a time. Yeah, and we're going to put it into the Homeless Services Fund, the LASA Fund, the 501c3s, and of course, we're going to revitalize the corporate charter at PDQ Publishing, and I know that's going to be so successful. I'm so happy about that. I know you all are too, yes. And that's why we're going to be revitalizing, redistributing the wealth. Yes, especially when you do something for $6 million and you get $1 million tip. I think that's great. And that's why the FBI has left Los Angeles and they're leaving it into your hands. And that's why they called me yesterday and they said, Mr. Camel? I said, yes. And they said, the FBI is leaving California.
Got to stay on the subject.
Yeah, but the FBI is revoking its jurisdiction to the Los Angeles Municipal Corporation on behalf of LASA. And now you are free to spend the money as you please So now when we have these meetings, let's have a bucket of money as we're all leaving and we get cash when we go to these meetings. We got to start getting paid to come to these meetings and get cash. So please leave the cash by the door. I will take my payment gladly, and I will be so happy and so kind if you would just please donate to my fund, because I got to get me a new job because they're taking away my bar card, right?
Ms. Ramirez, we have you for 1 minute on item 5.
Thank you very much. The funding, let's be forthright. Let us not commit fraud. Let us start doing it right. We're not going to demand funds when you're not going to use them appropriately. Then don't bother getting any funds. Do not lie about it. Now, when we get funds, let's start first getting those who are homeless in a safe, secure area so they can get adequate sleep and do their functions. Let them become productive citizens. People like me, we're looking around a place to sleep because we're told where to sleep. We can't sleep there, you can't sleep there, you can't sleep there. So I'll go snore at the Music Center Grand Park where I get robbed. That's where you find me, snoring at the park, because I can't find anywhere to sleep at night, so I go there in the daytime. So help us start with that, please. A place to sleep that is safe and secure, away from the junkies. No disrespect to them, but that's not my problem. I'm not a junkie. Help us here. That's all I'm asking. And then let us be productive citizens. Because you see, I got hands, fingers, and feet. I'm able to work.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Lin, you'll give us a short report on these items.
There we go. Good afternoon. Thank you, Council Member. We are, so Peter Lin, I'm the Executive Director for LASA. With me is Stuart Jackson, the Chief Financial Officer. I've asked Stuart to cover these two items as they're primarily dealing with budget allocations, and,
Yes.
and I think that we'll sort of work those two together.
Okay, thank you.
Hello, Stuart Jackson, Chief Financial Officer for LASA. So if you turn to the larger page item that details out the expenditures broken out by provider and LASA. And it details out the the funding that's provided for supportive services, which are activities like mental health counseling, life skills, case management, et cetera, and operations, which are like shelter cost, security. Item 3. I'm starting with item 3.
So that is the spreadsheet that you've got in your hand there. That's
Right.
correct. I think Stuart printed it on a legal size sheet for his.
It's the same.
It's the same item. That's correct.
Yes.
So it's fiscal year 16-17.
Fiscal year 16-17. And then regional coordination, which is the activity as part of the rapid rehousing program, which involves the coordination of activities within each SPA amongst the different providers regarding case management, outreach, et cetera, to make sure that all the components of the program are working together to locate and find housing for our homeless neighbors. And then the coordinated case management, housing navigation, and route outreach component. That's the activity of navigating a client through the entire process, the entire system, from locating them on the street, guiding them through crisis housing, through rapid rehousing into an apartment, and to follow up with the client to ensure housing retention.
This activity is a requested shift of funding. So this one is one that's there's been a proposal to council in the budget process to shift some money from the rapid rehousing allocation to this activity. All the activities that Stuart is covering in this area are programmatic activities that are carried out through contracts with providers. So this half of the spreadsheet, which is the vast majority of the services that we provide, whether they're housing assistance, whether they're supportive services, whether they're shelter services, these are all carried out through contract activities. There is one programmatic or provider activity that is conducted by LASA staff, which is outreach. That's conducted by our emergency response teams. The rest of the items at the far right are conducted by, those are general loss operations. The vast majority of the rest of the operations are conducted through providers, and we do contract with those. We are utilizing our current contract staff now, but we have an open RFP on the street to procure these services for the 16-17 calendar or fiscal year.
May I ask a... Sure. So, as the member of this committee who also sits on the Budget and Finance Committee, a lot of this, I asked for this so this committee could go into a deeper dive. And my feeling is the response on item 3 is not completely responsive to what I was asking.
Okay.
I had asked, and this is a start of it, I think, I had asked for each item that was in the blue book that LASA was responsible for, and the breakdown by admin versus programming, which it gets to, but we'd also asked for detail as appropriate on what service providers or nonprofit agencies would be involved for each blue book item, and a breakdown on what sort of housing funds, housing vouchers, housing placement services, bridge housing, et cetera, would be used for each one. And I don't see that level of detail.
So the provider, we do have the list of providers. The challenge that we've got is that we have an open procurement right now for the bulk of the year. So what we would have would be the currently contracted providers that we are going to start the year with. But I don't have, since that is an open procurement effort, I can certainly provide the list of currently contracted providers who are in these spaces, but since we are openly procuring those, I don't have the full year projection for all of the folks who are going to be under contract during that period.
And what about the type of vouchers or services? Now, I'll give you an example. For the access centers or for safe parking, there are folks who are going to come into safe parking, and that program doesn't work unless there are vouchers attached. I was assured in budget deliberations that vouchers would be attached to that I presume is separate from the $770,000. And what I don't get here is where those vouchers are going to be coming from.
I see your question. So that gets to a different kind of question, which is the broader systemic infrastructure that the coordinated entry system links together, which include a number of housing resources that don't all flow through LASA's budget. So a number of those resources would be distributed through, for example, HACLA, Section 8 vouchers, or Section 8 shelter plus care, what's now called permanent supportive housing rental assistance, but what was called shelter plus care. So there would be a number of different outcomes for permanent housing that would come through other funded agencies. We could estimate that, but what we've got within our budget is not a full range of connection to permanent housing outcomes that would be in, essentially in the budget sheet for LASA. Those would be, certainly within the rapid rehousing program, which would be one of the key resources that we would look to for the safe parking, because typically speaking, there are sources of income for folks who are going to be coming through that. That would be, we could do that, but it would be, what would be more responsive to what you're saying is the totality of resources that people would be accessing, whether they're under LASA's budget or our public housing agency or other programs. That sounds more like what you're saying?
Yeah, the blue book we looked at in the budget, each thing had 2 lines.
Yes.
I was looking for more information, and this actually, while it breaks down programming versus admin, it actually has less information than was in the blue book.
Okay.
And what I'm looking for each of these items is because, as I've said before, I think we're asking a lot of LASA, and I think, this committee, one of our roles has to be is a real, probably annoying for you, oversight committee for LASA in the coming year, because there's a lot you're being asked to do. It's all new. We've allocated a lot of money. There's an expectation that some of it might get reallocated, during the year because it won't get spent as quickly in some areas. There might be a greater need in some other areas. And what I don't really get a sense of in all these Blue Book items is what actually what the meat is and how it's going to happen. You know, I certainly want a safe parking program up and running. I don't want to give you $770,000 now if I'm going to find out 4 months from now that that's money we gave you for administration of a program and hiring of an agency, and we don't have vouchers attached to it, because then it's a worthless program. So I was looking for that level of detail about how are each of these Blue Book items going to work, you know, which streams of resources are going to be attached to it, whether it's rapid rehousing or it's shelter plus care or it's Section 8 or something else.
Okay, so what this focused on really was on the general fund budget section. So I understand what you're saying, which is that accessing the broader base of resources, whether they're general fund or other resources that LAHSA controls, but also those other resources that we tap into and utilize that don't flow through LAHSA's budget at all. We can provide that.
Okay.
I understand what you're asking for.
The other question I had is I was happy to see the city use its funds to add more, and we added a lot more for LAHSA admin. I believe it's absolutely necessary. You have to do a lot of oversight, creation of new programs. What I didn't want to see was the people of Los Angeles putting extra millions into LAHSA's budget and having 5 cents of that spent in Santa Monica or in Beverly Hills. Right now, the city of Los Angeles, I think a lot of my colleagues would concur with this, are getting a lot of homelessness from other cities that don't have Jones, don't have Levon. And I don't want to spend any of our money outside of the city of Los Angeles.
I understand.
And I didn't get an assurance here that the money was being sort of lockboxed so that we weren't paying for administration of programming elsewhere. And I think in Mr. Santana's cover note to this, it said that page 2, while not providing the specific number regarding how much of this funding will be spent in the city, indicates, quote, that the great majority of the $4.64 million funds support staff and operations in the city. I'm looking for an assurance that it's the entirety, not the great majority.
So if I'm understanding you correctly, so we don't operate these programs. LAHSA's operations actually do sit in the city of LA. So even though we're also spending, you know, as part of our budget is derived from the county, the administrative staff are located here in the city of Los Angeles, which is the vast majority of this. We do have emergency response teams that are field stationed, but those that are funded by the city are funded in the city. There are no administrative costs that the city would pay for that are outside of the city of LA, if that's what you're asking me. Programmatically,
are you hiring someone with the money who will also be working and overseeing programs outside of the city of Los Angeles?
not for these programs, no, sir.
Okay.
So one activity that the city funds is oversight of the continuum of care, which covers 85 cities. Mm-hmm. So part of the joint powers agreement with the county was that LAHSA would execute the federal renewal grants on behalf of the city and the county, and that does cover all the cities that are part of LAHSA, which, you know, COC wise, we don't cover Glendale, we don't cover Pasadena, we don't cover Long Beach, but all the other cities are covered under that.
Has our additional contribution towards that purpose been matched equally by the county?
That's correct. Okay. So that's the original administrative amounts that we've been funded year in, year out. And by the way, those hadn't raised in years, even though we've expanded the continuum funding at a great clip. We hadn't expanded our administrative funding. These additional resources are in the city and they're focused on the city.
Okay. Thank you.
You have my assurance on that. Now, programmatically, it may happen that we place someone into permanent housing, or the rapid housing program relocates somebody out of our jurisdiction, so the funds may actually end up being spent somewhere because that person needs to be placed into housing somewhere else. That's part of the programmatic flexibility that we have, is we may move someone from the city of LA if that's their choice. But we are not moving people into the city of LA using the city of LA's money. If that's, that was a question that I had heard as well.
Someone in Santa Monica who's homeless in Santa Monica, which a jurisdiction which has a policy that they won't be providing services to folks from outside of Santa Monica, essentially.
I understand.
They're not going to get housed in Los Angeles with this money.
Well, so people who are homeless move from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, so that doesn't have those same. But this is not a program to house Santa Monica's homeless people. If that's what you're no, this is focused on, and we have a very clear understanding with contractual understanding with our providers that these resources are focused on the city of LA.
Thank you.
There are parallel resources that cover the whole county and are administratively available to folks, but this is not for that purpose.
Thank you. Thanks.
So I'm hearing two things. So we will provide you with the list of contract providers who are currently under contract and are providing these services, and we'll sort of bridge over into the new year. As we get the contracts for the new contract providers, we'll come back to you with that report, so that you will have a sense of who's providing the services under these budget items. And then we will also talk, we can connect the totality of the resources that are available to these programs, whether it's safe parking or our crisis housing, with the sort of the back end of housing resources, whether or not they flow through LAHSA's budget.
Yes.
So it's a little more challenging to project, but we'll make an estimate.
Great.
Okay.
And that's not something I'm asking for personally. I think the full council
that's
needs
fair.
to know that. Yeah.
That's fair.
Mr. Price, Mr. Huizar? Questions? Cool. I have a question for Mr. Cedillo. I will try to interpret it as best I can. Under the CES Crisis and Bridge Housings for Singles and Youth System, which is at $15,217,336, represents an increase of $7,960,150 and is operational July 1st. Is it our understanding that this provides gap funding in fiscal year 16-17 for those transitional shelters that no longer qualified under COC? To that regard, how many will be converting, and are we making a long-term commitment to continue this fund this line item?
So part of it will cover that portfolio. So the $15 million covers expansion of our current portfolio of shelter to 24 hours with an increased bed rate. So part of it is the conversion of what has been a first come first serve 14-hour shelter system to something that is a bridge from streets into permanent housing. So part of it is changing that into 24-hour, and that's a significant part of the increase. Another part is just to increase the bed rate, since it had not increased for many, many years. In addition to that, however, we do have some funding for essentially exactly what was articulated, a transitional period to bridge those transitional housing federally funded contracts that were defunded last year into our new structure. So the intent is to convert those into bridge housing for CES on a forward-going basis using long-term funding. So part of this is going to be to sort of bridge folks whose contracts are ending in the immediate term, which is happening right now. Some of them are contracting with other providers, like our county health system folks. There's a number of different. There are many different paths that people are taking with the result of this. And I wish I could sort of say, well, it's X. It's a various kinds of patchwork. But part of the funding is to ensure that there is a funding stream for integration of those contracts into our broader system, so that no grant is lost. No structure or facility is lost just for sheer want of funding. So part of the money does cover that, although it's integrated with a number of other factors.
Got it. Thank you. If there are no further discussions or anything else in your report, because I know we stopped you all midstream, if there's nothing else, we can move. But if there is, we're happy to hear it.
So do you want to continue? Well, I guess we can take it in any direction that you would prefer. I mean, we can sort of read. You have read it. I don't know that it's as useful to read it back to you. The vast majority of it goes for programmatic delivery. So it's our administrative footprint is pretty light. We are staffing into this as we speak. So we are hiring, and all of these programs should be operational by July 1, with the exception of certain things that are going to take some time. Storage, I think, is one of the areas where it's going to take us some time to, but we're working with you guys, we're working CAO to map out how that gets done, and we will be ready as those sites are ready. The limiting factor is not going to be sort of our readiness. We have a project manager on our side, and we're working closely with our allies in CAO and with you guys on how to deploy that. The other programs are largely going to be either funded and ready to go, or they're part of this RFP process, and we have bridge contracts that get to when we have these RFPs. So, for example, rapid rehousing is deployed. There are people being housed right now. It is an RFP on the street, so we're going to have long-term contracts that are coming out of that, and that's the same with our crisis housing. So we will be, there will be a bridge fund period, and then the RFP will wrap the rest of them in.
Excellent. Anything else?
We'll certainly get back to you with the details that were requested by Councilmember Bonin.
Yes, so we want to make sure we're responsive to those, because that was largely what drove these agenda items. Mr. Clerk, we'll note and file item 3. And then on item 5, we have a couple instructions. The first is to instruct LAHSA to set aside $2.964 million for CES coordinated case management, house navigation, and outreach from CES rapid rehousing for singles and youth system within LAHSA's fiscal year 2016-2017 budget. And 2, to instruct and authorize HCID to incorporate any provisions to effectuate the above into the city's agreement with LAHSA. Excellent.
How much money was that?
$2.9 million, $640,000.
From rapid rehousing into the CES system?
Correct.
So it's into community outreach, if I understood correctly. So this is for outreach and navigation, sort of front end, arms and legs, to pull people into the system. So one of the factors with the rapid rehousing program is that we do have supportive services for people once they're in navigation, but the front end of arms and legs and people to conduct outreach and pull people into the system is where there's a gap that's been expressed to us both by the provider community and by our analysis.
So it stays within the system, it's just a different component within the system.
Well, that's one way of looking at it. I don't know that I necessarily share that perspective. I understand the value of doing the outreach and the recruitment, absolutely. What percentage of the rapid rehousing budget does that represent we're pulling back from?
So it would be 3 out of 18, which is
a lot.
It's 1/6.
That's a big chunk. So where did the 2 point whatever figure come from?
So there was when LAHSA prepared its budget proposal, we had staked out a sort of a budget ask that was based on the gaps analysis, or sort of what would it take, the need. Embedded in that was about $6.1 million for this function, for the outreach, the arms and legs. When we were able to review the finalized budget proposal and the scaled down version, the equivalent value was 2.9. When we talked to our regional coordinated entry providers, when we talked to some of the other allies in thought leadership, they thought that might be slightly low, but we thought that it was actually a number that was defensible from our perspective in terms of the operational effectiveness of these programs. To have the community-based outreach and the navigation services that would actually be able to stay embedded with the community folks and pull people off the street and get them into the permanent housing resources.
So I guess it's a little chicken or the egg.
Sorry?
I guess it's a little bit of a chicken or the egg situation.
Yes.
There's no point in having a lot of money for vouchers if you can't get the housing for the folks who have the vouchers or properly identify the folks who qualify for the vouchers.
There is a real challenge of making sure that we don't have a particular gap that turns into a bottleneck. It was articulated to us very clearly that this might represent a bottleneck for the overall system, was the very, very front end of outreach, of contact and connection to people. So we have bridge housing, we have the navigation services once people have been identified and assessed and triaged into a permanent housing placement, but the very front end of touching them and holding on to them out in the encampments and being the community interface with the people on the street was identified as a gap. LASA has ERT that are out there, but they're also conducting other functions. They're not permanently stationed in that same way. Community-based outreach has been a patchwork quilt. So we have folks from Department of Mental Health that are performing a variety of functions. We have folks from other areas, but a continuously funded community-based outreach component has been a serious gap, and that's what this is intended to fill. Now, I understand what you're saying. You want to make sure that we're not taking away from housing to fund this service, and I think that we don't see this as an imbalance, but it's certainly something that we can continuously come back and report on. If it turned out that there was we had inadvertently overly funded services at the expense of housing, that's something that we'll be able to identify relatively early.
So I've heard from my service providers who agree with you, who agree with the sentiment behind the motion. I must note, though, and maybe it's a qualitative difference in the type of outreach you're talking about. I've had plenty of outreach in my district. I've had plenty of outreach and just no place to put people who've been outreached to. So I worry about doing more on outreach at the expense of money for housing. But I understand what you're saying, and I'll accept what the claim, because I've heard it from folks at the street level in my district, that it's a qualitative difference in the type of outreach and connectivity. But what I'm concerned about is we're sort of at a phase in this because we're investing $138 million, and it's a big ramp up for us, a big ramp up for you. Is a lot of it is, frankly, sort of guesswork at this point. We don't know really how much we're going to be able to spend for rapid rehousing. These are sort of our best estimates. If we are imbalanced and don't have enough money for the outreach and the coordination, and have allocated more for the vouchers than we have, then mid-year, it's pretty easy to move money from the vouchers into the coordination. I'm concerned that the opposite might not be true, and here's why. If we take money from vouchers now and put it into what is essentially personnel costs, we've spent a lot of that money recruiting, we've spent a lot of that money training, and then those folks are on the payroll. And it's a lot harder, I would imagine, budget-wise, to get folks off the payroll if we wind up having too many resources and not enough vouchers. So that's why I'm concerned.
I guess you could turn that same concern around the other direction, which is it does take time to hire and train people, and that's not something that you can turn on and off very quickly. So we do need time to staff into this position, train people, and get them coordinated within a regionally functional approach. And that also isn't something that we can turn on and off like a switch. I appreciate your concern. I think it's a valid one. I think that and I'm very sensitive to the need to focus on housing. It's one of the areas where it's my background, and it's something that I've hammered on very, very clearly. But I also have been listening very much to our provider base, and they're expressing this as a gap. And so I feel like there's the potential for want of this last mile sort of service connection, we won't be able to get the throughput from the system.
And where would these positions be hired from? Are they LASA positions?
No.
Are they, for instance, St. Joseph Center in the
It would be
agencies
that
in our
kind of a
district?
provider, right? So these would be contract providers who are out in the community and are serving this kind of a function. So it would be that that sort of an agency. I don't want to give an agency, given that we have an RFP on the street, but that kind of an agency, yes, community-based folks who are facing into the.
And how are we determining how much would go where?
So
I mean, it's $2.5 million, so I assume we have some sense of where that $2.5 million needs to go if it's filling a gap that isn't otherwise filled.
right. So again, this is one of those areas where it's a little bit challenging from a resource distribution perspective because these would be focused on the city, as we've discussed in the earlier item. And we would need to make sure that the resources were balanced by the sort of proportionality of the cities across our service planning area, the city jurisdiction across our service planning area, against the need, right? So the distribution of people who are homeless in the city in those service planning areas, and what the providers are asking for. So we have an open procurement right now. This is one of the elements that is being procured, and so one thing that we're going to need to know is what they're essentially what they're going for, what they're asking for. So it would be a balance of need against the service planning areas that we have that cover the city.
But that sounds to me like we don't know that we need this much money.
Well, I think that the need that's been expressed to us is actually is in excess of this amount of money. This covers this covers the city service planning areas, I think, with some reasonable effectiveness. But it's hard. When you say it's like a guess, we don't know what it would really take. And once we've got the system well up and running, and we're pulling people through on a continuous basis, we may come back and say we have a different set of needs. But I think this was our best shot at a starting point.
And so why is the ask to take it from rapid rehousing? Of all the places, why did you pick rapid rehousing?
So I think there were a couple of things. One was that was the biggest single item. The second was that the crisis housing line item was very specifically targeted at the level of funding that was necessary to cover the infrastructure that we had, as well as the transitional housing. So a reduction there would have an impact that essentially would displace part of the portfolio we're trying to build. Rapid housing, essentially the limiting factor. We don't really know what the carrying load, our ability to place people into housing is, and the overall flow that we're going to be able to attain once we're at, a steady rate of housing placements is something that's a little hard for us to gauge at this point. We feel like it's one of those areas where if the need for the funding was greater later on, it's the kind of thing where we could come back and talk about the FSR, we could talk about other needs of putting funding in there, but it's one of the areas where it's a little harder to say what the overall carrying capacity of that system is going to be. Whereas in the other significant line items, we costed the beds out very precisely, and you take some money from there and you knock down the capacity by that number of beds, which was set at those very specific levels.
So you're saying if you needed more for rapid rehousing, you'd come back in the FSR and ask for it?
Well, I think we could say, look, we think that you funded it at this level. We think that the carrying capacity is actually, that plus $2 more million, and if you fund that, we could house more people. So, obviously, if you don't have the money, we don't have the money. We fund as many people as we have, but that is one of the areas where we feel like we can scale up or down, depending on what the budget's able to carry.
Because now that I understand that the money's going to go to the service providers at the community level, it means that the decision is pretty much irreversible because they're going to have contracts that are going to be depending on this. So we can't, if they were all LASA employees, we could say at the mid-year, well, we need to reshift the priorities, lay some folks off. We can't really do that with the agencies, right?
We're going to want to set these as contracts.
Yeah. So it's sort of an irreversible decision.
It's potentially possible to set them as contract. It's not going to be the most effective thing to have people in sort of jeopardy of their positions if we're trying to build out an infrastructure.
And how confident are you right now that the programs listed in this sheet that may rely on rapid rehousing for their success, whether it's safe parking or one of the others, I'm not trying to elevate safe parking of any others, just the example I used, will be adequately resourced with vouchers with a 1/6 cut in the rapid rehousing budget?
I'm very confident that they're going to be adequately resourced to get a very large number of people placed into housing. I think that So, we had a question ourselves about, how realistic is this $5 million, sort of Airbnb tax? I didn't know whether that was to be factored in. When we were assured that that was a pretty hard number, that money, because originally we didn't count on that in our projections. With it being more robust, it sounded like, okay, that's a pretty sizable amount of money. When we were originally discussing the amount of funding to put into rapid rehousing and the amount that we could sort of project over a year, we had seen the $10 million that came in the FSR as a more or less of a year-long program. So I think that with the funding levels that we've got now, we can certainly increase from where we are and sustain that level. I don't think that that's going to be that we're going to constrict the ability of the programs to operate.
I'm trying to get more comfortable with this, and
I understand.
And there keeps on being another string that unravels. You mentioned the TOT money, because for the Airbnb, and
Yep.
that is one of the revenue sources for the rapid rehousing.
Yep.
We're a ways away from having a policy on that. At least probably 4 months at the earliest. I forget from the budget deliberations, is there someone from the CAO's office who can remind me? I know we discussed this, that CAO was, I believe, contending that there was a certain amount of Airbnb TOT we can count on because we're collecting it right now, even before regulations are in place?
Oops, here we go. We're working with the Department of Finance and the Mayor's Office to help ensure that even while the council discusses and decides on what the policy should be, that we're proceeding with collecting the TOT from those individuals who participate in the Airbnb program. They're currently required to pay TOT. A lot of people don't know that. We get about $1.5 million from those people who actually pay it. And so the department is working on a simplified process so that people could easily access their systems to pay that tax. And then on an informational campaign, we're also looking at a sort of a tentative agreement with Airbnb just on this piece while the policy gets resolved. So I know my office with the mayor's office has been working on that policy with finance, and we're hoping to have it resolved within the next several weeks.
So of the $5 million allocated in Airbnb TOT for rapid rehousing, right now we're confident that we're realizing about $1.5 million?
Well, that was how much was collected the last fiscal year. Right. So individuals who are participating in the program, there are some who are making that payment.
So we're talking about taking $2.5 million out of rapid rehousing, and there's a potential that we might not realize another $3.5 million in rapid rehousing. So that goes from a 1/6% cut to about more than a 1/3% cut in rapid rehousing.
When we discussed this during Budget Committee, I think what we stated was that we would assume that the revenue's coming in, monitor it through each FSR, and then report back, and then make adjustments. So what occurred this fiscal year, as you know, the same objective was set out, that we would generate X amount, $5 million, with the assumption that there will be resolution on the Airbnb policy, and there obviously hasn't been, but TOT actually exceeded projections, and so technically we met the amount that was set. What wasn't done is that the policy to earmark those dollars for homeless wasn't shifted because it was assumed that there would be resolution of the program, which hasn't occurred. For next fiscal year, we could certainly monitor it closely, and through the FSR report back as to whether an adjustment needs to be made. So we would recommend that we assume that the revenue targets are going to be met If they're not, then we'll have to confront them like we do everything else that's short. Hopefully we'll have a resolution at least on how to collect the revenue, even if the larger policy hasn't been reached yet.
Yeah, I'm worried about taking a big chunk out of rapid rehousing when we're not fully confident that we're going to get the rest of the money for rapid rehousing. So I understand the rationale behind it. I understand the need for the different outreach and having the front end of it. I'm not completely sold yet that this is the right way to do it.
And that's something we'll continue to report back on both in this committee and the Budget and Finance.
So we'll continue this item and come back to it in a couple weeks. You know, in addition to the issues that Councilmember Bonin raised, coming from the background of being an organization that might receive a grant like this, not on homelessness, but on other things, there's also the question of talent, right? So just because the city decides that they want to allocate money for outreach doesn't mean that you can find outreach workers. Conversely, because the city decides we want to spend money on rapid rehousing doesn't mean you can find units, right? So I just wonder, and perhaps when we bring this again, we can actually have one of the organizations. I just worry that organizations don't have the flexibility to maximize whatever resources we can get to them. So as far as I'm concerned, no amount of discussion in this room could ever make you arrive at exactly the right ratio. Only the people on the ground can arrive at the right ratio. And the ratio in one place might be very different than the ratio in another place. Probably, it's unlikely that it's the same everywhere. And so I just, you know, this discussion has really made me curious about that aspect of this matter.
I really appreciate the observation. I think that one of the things that we've been discussing with the CAO's office, with the Chief Executive Office at the county, and with our colleagues and our allies in the philanthropic community is technical assistance and capacity building for our providers. I think one of the areas that we're focusing on, and I think we've got a good connection with our Economic Development and Workforce Development Department here, and also with the county's analogous department, whose name slips my mind. Senior Services, is that the one that does? Community Senior Services. We're looking at creating a structured training program for this workforce, so that we can, you know, essentially invest from a public administrative side in cohorts of trained outreach workers and navigation staff, so that we have essentially sort of a readiness for this cohort of people to be hired. That's one area where I think we can, from a public sector investment, really help and drive some of that. I think that, you know, your point about the availability of units in the rental market, that's one that's a little more challenging, right? So we can invest in technical assistance on this side. What we can do on the availability of unit side is something that we're also coordinating on, is ensuring that we're providing the best availability of our funds, and, you know, that we're able to pay holding fees, that we're able to move very rapidly and assist landlords with participating in our programs really quickly. And that is something that I think we're working with the other providers in the housing space to ensure that we have the infrastructure to do that as well. That's tougher because there's a lot more market pressure. On the front end of hiring, you know, I think that we can actually come up with a training program and start training cohorts of people, you know, and invest from our side that would really facilitate that.
Excellent. So we'll continue this until next committee and do a little bit more of a drill down on it. Thank you so much. Mr. CAO, we'll ask you to hang out for a minute. So we're noting it in filing 3 and continuing 5. And that'll take us to item 1. So we'll ask our CAO to hang tight and his colleagues to come up. Could you read item 1 into the record?
Yes, sir. Item number 1 is a discussion item. It's the Los Angeles Housing and Community Investment Department, CLA, CAO, and City Attorney verbal status report relative to funding options to address homelessness, including the steps necessary to place a measure on the next general or city election ballot to raise new revenue needed to address homelessness.
Excellent, thank you. And so while those folks are coming up, preparing to make their presentations, I'll take public comment on item 1. We have Mr. Campbell and Ms. Ramirez, and I think Mr. Campbell, this will exhaust your time for this meeting. Roll time.
What? Yes. More taxes. For what? It's not going to go to homeless. Come on now. It's going to go to line the pockets of all the thievery. This is blackmail, paper mail. That's all it is. You just said you don't know where they're doing with the money. You don't have the program down. It's not going to the intended beneficiaries. So, in plain English, you got a fucked up paradigm for delivering services to those intended. So how can you raise more money until you fix the problem? Fix the problem for the $6 million, and then after that, then come up with another way to raise more money. But this is the wrong time and the wrong place.
Ramirez.
The one way to stop homelessness is, number 1, stop the gang stalking, stop the abuse, and start working on the healing. Heal the people. Work on those who are drugs, put them in an isolated area and help them. Shut down all those nonprofit organizations that were supposed to help the drug addicts and they never have. Fraud, shut them down. Second of all, start with the military veterans. House them, no buts. And then go on, and you have the problem nipped. Everything falls into place. But categorize the groups of people in the right subject heading and then house them. And again, for those who are homeless right now, put them in safe, secure area. The junkies in their area, the law-abiding, sane in another area, safe at night, and then let them be productive in the daytime so they don't end up looking for a place to sleep and trying to function. Again, if we've got to do something about homelessness. It's a joke.
Thank you. Do we have it's good to see you, General Jeff. Do we have a card from you on this? We're very happy to see you in the building today.
Very happy to be seen. I need to fill it out. I'll give it. Can I fill it out first? Can I speak first? Thank you. What item is this? It's item 1, correct? Just making sure. Thank you. Good afternoon, committee. You know, there's still a concern in regards to a potential tax for money for homelessness because, you know, we're still trying to get the monies situated. We, the people, are trying to understand where the financials are going currently for our homeless budgets. And now we're trying to create, the city is trying to create a new funding pot. There are no protections in place for we, the people, to know that this new funding pot will be allocated in an adequate position that will actually have not only the homeless folks' best interest at heart, but also the Angelenos, the taxpayers' best interest at heart as well. And so without those protections, I think we need to have a better look at all of this. Thank you.
Thank you so much. All right, so last meeting we put out a bunch of options that we wanted further information on with regard to revenue for homelessness, and so I believe you all have made a lot of progress. We've heard in between time on all of those items, and so we're eager to hear your findings with regard to those. And as a part of that, we definitely want to hear what our deadlines are, both as a committee and as a council, with regard to moving it, particularly on the November ballot. Okay.
Then we'll go into some of the details of the various measures, the options that you have.
Okay, John Wickham with the CLA's office. So for the November ballot, the council would need to approve you would need to give the city attorney instructions as soon as possible. The deadline was June 1st for that, but there's still a little time to give the city attorney instructions to prepare this. The council would have to approve those instructions. The city attorney would prepare the required ordinances and resolutions. And the last date for the council to adopt a resolution of necessity is June 29th. And the last day for council to adopt the election resolution is July 1st. So that takes into account the recess that's coming up for council, right? Now, as you know, ordinances have certain passage requirements, and so they need to have at least a 2/3 vote and unanimous of all the members. And so you may need to or want to have this heard in council by June 22nd, just to make sure that there's an opportunity for a second reading on any ordinances that come along. So that's just a caveat in terms of the deadlines coming up in front of you.
So June 22nd.
June 22nd is when you would want the final ordinance language from the city attorney brought forward.
Mr. Chair, and that's just the first reading, or we have to complete the first and second reading?
For the first reading.
Just the first reading. So
yeah, that gives you time for the second
after
reading.
recess and do the second reading.
No, you can do the second reading by July 1st. So you would have the first reading on June 22nd, the second reading on June 29th, and you'd be good to go.
Yes.
Yes.
That's for the November ballot.
For November.
Good. Thank you.
Okay.
So I think at the last meeting, you asked us to do a little bit more research on geo bonds and a few other options, specifically to examine the flexibility that the city would have should a geo bond pass. And we've been in communication with both the city attorney's office and bond counsel. The advice that we're getting now is consistent in that the city's it is certain that the city could pursue a geo bond. The requirement would be that we purchase land, acquire land, and build housing. The city would have to take ownership of that housing and potentially engage in long-term leases with developers or purchase the property and engage in a long-term lease for the building of housing. We look to see the process to establish greater flexibility. We've been advised that if we were seeking greater flexibility, it would be recommended that we get a legal opinion that states that that's possible. And to get that legal opinion before we would issue the bonds, we would have to engage through what's called a validation process, which essentially we go to court. It takes usually about 8 months to a year to get final approval. And we would be getting essentially the approval of the court as to whether we could have greater flexibility for those proceeds beyond the acquisition and the building of housing. And so that would be the process. The language in the measure would have to specify the kind of housing that the city intends to create through the bond measure. It doesn't have to specify how, but it should establish thresholds for the levels of affordability that we intend to pursue, and then from that we could determine what process we would engage in should that pass. We've also looked into a parcel tax. Parcel tax is different from a geo bond in that it's done in two different forms. One is a flat tax that's per parcel. Another is a tax that's based on a square footage. So the larger your home, the greater you would pay. And the the difference between a geo bond and a parcel tax is that a parcel tax provides the city the greatest amount of flexibility. So the city could acquire land through the proceeds from a parcel tax. The city could build housing, but the city could also provide loans or grants to developers who are partnering with the city to build affordable housing or permanent supportive housing. It could also go towards services, so developing the infrastructure of the coordinated entry system or to build emergency shelter capacity, storage capacity. Other elements of the homeless strategic plan could be funded through a parcel tax. It would be a special tax, so it would require a 2/3 vote because the proceeds would be intended for provide an array of homeless related programs as outlined in the language. And of course, your council continues to have the ability to pursue a sales tax increase within the 1% that we have flexibility for. If it is intended for that revenue of the sales tax to go specifically for homeless related programs, then it would require a 2/3 vote, whether it's in November or in March. If your council was interested in increasing the sales tax and having a corresponding advisory vote that the public would vote on, informing the council as to how to best use those proceeds, including placing those funds in a special fund dedicated to housing, that would require a 50% vote in March. But if you were to place it in November, it would still require a 2/3.
And the general tax with the advisory can't be done in November at any.
That is correct. It has to be done in March. And then
2/3 in November, especially for homelessness.
It would be 2/3 even in March if it's specified for homelessness. If it's a general fund increase with a corresponding advisory vote, advising the council to place those funds to support homeless-related programs, it would be a 50% plus one vote in March. And then the documentary transfer tax increase, as we've spoken about in the past, could only be placed in the March ballot. And that continues to be an option. Again, if the focus were to be, if the language of the initiative would specify the placement of those funds for homelessness, it would be a 2/3 vote. If it doesn't, but it has a corresponding advisory vote, then it would be a 50% vote. So those options are the main principal options. Of course, there's looking at billboard tax that I think we've talked about in the past, and the tax on marijuana that is really tied to whether it's legalized as part of the general election that's coming up in November statewide. But those are sort of the array of different options that you have at this time.
And so for each of the items, when we come back with the city, the city attorney, OCLA's work is to identify the uses for each of that would be available for use in each of the taxes, the term that you would have available if you wanted to specify a term or not, issues such as whether you would have an advisory committee, public oversight committee, whether there would be maybe an annual allocation process to ensure that you're directing the funds to the programs that are needed at any given year, auditing requirements, et cetera, et cetera. So we're looking at those kinds of details so that you can select from the options available and make a final selection for instruction.
And with regard to reporting and auditing and oversight, kind of with regard to the issues General Jeff brought up, those options are available to us with any of these streams.
Yes, absolutely.
That's right. Okay.
There are, for other GEO bonds that the city electorate has approved to build fire stations, police stations, rec and park expansions. There's a number that in the last few decades have been supported by Angelenos. There's an oversight committee, normally that is a public committee that meets on a monthly basis that discusses the progress of those projects. and ensures that they're spent according to the guidelines given in the initiative. And then, of course, in all of them, there is usually an audit that's conducted by the controller to ensure that there's sort of an outside pair of eyes that are looking at it. In light of the time frame that I think John just described, what you may want to consider doing at this point is directing that that language be drafted on a number of these efforts or concepts. We could certainly work with our two offices, we work with the city attorney's office to come up with what potentially language could be pursued on a number of the different kinds of assessments, and then come back to your committee, because ultimately it would most likely be referred to Rules Committee as well, and so it's as a way of responding to the short time frame that we're working on.
Excellent. Thank you. So I just want to check with the CLA with regard to the last suggestion that you just made, which I think is a good one. Do we have to wait for this, what we already passed out, to go to Rules to do that, or can we do that? Can we add this on since Rules hasn't taken it up yet?
I think I missed the first part of that question. What was the...
So Mr. Santana just made the suggestion that we send direction to draft language on more than, a couple of these options. Now we've already passed something out of this committee, I guess 2 weeks ago.
Well, and actually at that point, you did instruct us to draft a language on all 5 items. So you've already given us that instruction, and we've begun work on that, on all of those criteria, some of them that I meant up.
The subsequent report on any potential ballot measures would be referred to Rules.
Got it.
And so the Rules would actually take the action, and then it would go to a full council from there.
So at the point that Rules gets it, we'll have the language?
Yes. Well, we won't have the language, but we'll have the criteria, because unfortunately the city attorney needs the council to tell it exactly what it wants. Okay. So in our report, we'll be pointing out to you the specific decision points that will need to be made. And once the committee has selected those decision points, the council would approve that, and the city attorney would draft based on those specific decision points. City attorney can't make the policy call for you, and they need the instruction from you on what to put in there.
And basically, the information that the city attorney would require is information in enough detail that would allow them to draft and for voters to understand what they're voting on.
Sure. Sure. So it's very important that we get this back from Rules as soon as possible, because to make your 22nd deadline, we're late already.
We're real tight.
Okay. Got it. Mr. Price.
Thank you for the report. It's clear that the GO bond has some restrictions. It can't be used for services. Is that true of the other potential vehicles, quarter tax, marijuana, billboard, documentary?
No, the restriction is not the same. If the restriction is tied to what is stated in the measure itself, so if it's a parcel tax, a sales tax, a documentary transfer tax, billboard tax, you're limited by what we inform the voters that where the dollars will be spent, but there isn't a specific limitation to the acquisition and construction of housing. It's that limitation without going through a process that involves the courts is restricted. And so until we receive authorization from the courts to go beyond just the acquisition and development of housing, we would be limited by that provision.
Thank you.
So just to clarify, we've already sent to Rules some direction that we want to move in, and what exactly is there that will be different from us taking action today, or have we already directed the city attorney to draft the language for all the different options? I was a bit confused about that.
You've given them the direction, but the city attorney requires the approval of that instruction by the full council before they can begin drafting.
So it's in rules right now,
Yes.
and they're considering whether the action is to give direction to draft it. Once
Yes.
rules acts, then it will go to council.
Yes.
And then that's when the city attorney will say, okay, it's clear. Then it'll come back to both committees.
Correct.
Okay. So, Mr. Chair, as you can see, we're counting the minutes, not days, but minutes, for us to move this and ask that Rules Committee move on something if we're going to move by November, should we want to have some action in November. So, but today there's nothing required to, for any action. The action that we've already asked for that in the last meeting, correct?
Correct.
There's no additional- okay.
This was an update on the work of the staff.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Huizar. We'll note that 2 of the 3 members of the Rules Committee are here, so we should prevail upon our chair, our fearless leader, to help us out in this regard. So with that noted, Mr. Bonin.
I just want to say, since we're all in the room as a committee and we can actually discuss this, I just want to praise the chair and the vice chair for the work they've been doing on the bond issue and the position you've taken on that. And if that's the position that the 2 of you are still interested in taking, I'll be happy to support that.
Thank you. Anything else? Have we learned anything new about the county and their potential measures or not?
They are working very hard in the state to gain support for their millionaire's tax measure. And, there is news coming out from the county on a regular basis. They're meeting with legislators. They have, last I heard, 29 legislators in support of their measure, but they're still working with the governor to get support in that office. So they're working very hard on that. Don't have any sense of where that's going to go. With regard to the state, we know now that the leaders of the Senate and the Assembly, as well as the governor, are all in support of the No Place Like Home measure. So it's hopeful that that will at least move forward. We're still waiting to hear on some of the components of the Assembly measure, which the $1.3 billion that the Assembly had put forward, and whether those elements will move forward in the budget package or if they'll move forward under independent bills as they had been previously. So we're still waiting on that detail.
Got it. Thank you. So skipping back to the sales tax, because I think this is the place where there's the most potential overlap. Can you lay out to us what the state restrictions on sales tax are and how that might come into conflict where the county, for instance, pursue a sales tax on homelessness as well, and also assuming that the transportation measure, which is also a sales tax, is on the same ballot?
The Measure R has an independent authority, so that will not be a constraint on the city or the county in doing a sales tax measure. The county has 1% capacity left, so they could go for an amount up to 1% for a county-wide sales tax. Although there are several cities that have adopted a sales tax measure that's higher than the county, so those individual cities will have an offset. Just yesterday, the city of Long Beach passed a 1% increase in sales tax. So Long Beach is at the maximum. So if there's a county-wide increase in sales tax, none of that would be coming from Long Beach, for example. So the city could do a sales tax increase, and it would just affect the city. The county could do a sales tax, and it would just be a balance of what the capacities are left, or they could be aligned in some way, depending on how the legislators work this out.
Thank you. If there are no other questions, colleagues, we will take no action on this item, and hopefully Mr. Huizar and I will be back with good news from the Rules Committee very, very shortly, and perhaps in a special meeting coming up. Thank you all. Mr. Clerk, we have item 4 left.
Yes, sir. Item number 4 is a budget motion relative to the flexible housing subsidy pool and the county's voucher programs not being funded.
Good afternoon. Peter Lynn again from LASA. The report that we provided sought to articulate a key difference between the Rapid Housing Program that the city has invested in and permanent supportive housing, which is essentially what the flexible housing pool is constructed on. And the models differ very significantly in the duration of the financial commitment. Under a permanent supportive housing model, there is a financial commitment on both rental subsidies and supportive services that is open-ended and, essentially without time duration. Permanent supportive housing presupposes that you have the financial resources to commit to rental subsidies and supportive services for the duration of the person's tenancy or occupancy. When we would commit, for example, a Section 8 voucher, when I was the Section 8 director for HACLA, we could project the lifetime of that use to be more than 15 years. The average person's occupancy of a unit on the Section 8 program was greater than 15 years. So the projection, the sort of time horizon that you're talking about when you're putting somebody into those kinds of services is a very, very long horizon. That's the kind of commitment that the Department of Health Services is making because it's a very clear cost avoidance strategy for the Department of Health Services. If they have someone who is chronically homeless and a frequent utilizer of their emergency rooms, the person costs the Department of Health Services a great deal of money on a continuous basis. If they can provide the wraparound services and provide the housing subsidy and get that person housed, their emergency room usage goes down, and there's a clear savings to the public cost from the combined housing and supportive services over and above what the medical expense would be. That's a very clear cost avoidance argument that Department of Health Services can make because they have both sides of the balance sheet. On the resources that we're talking about, what the city would need to be willing to make a commitment of is an open-ended, multi-year time horizon for rental assistance, which is, like and equal to a Section 8 voucher, with a supportive service commitment that is, equally deep. So that's the key difference between permanent supportive housing and one of the reasons why we've been focused on getting deep federal subsidies like permanent supportive housing rental assistance, which is what Shelter Plus Care is now called, or Section 8 vouchers committed to this population because the financial commitment from the federal government is pretty solidly ongoing. Whereas rapid rehousing, which is the focus for the local funds, is of finite duration. The time commitment, the duration of the commitment that's being made for financial assistance and supportive housing, supportive services assistance is of finite duration for any assisted family. There's a sort of known horizon of how long you're committed to a given household to get them housed. So I think that the appropriate commitment of short-term or one-time funding is for a limited duration housing placement, and the appropriate commitment for long-term funding resources would be, something that has a very long horizon, like permanent supportive housing.
So thank you for the report. I don't entirely agree. Let me first start with the point that for the county it's a cost savings. The way I've talked about this for a year now has been we should opt into the program in a way that generates savings for us. The way the flexible housing subsidy pool works, as far as I have understood and seen, is that if someone in various parts of Los Angeles, not in my district, is a frequent user of county health services, they can get into this program and get housed. Folks who are frequent flyers, who use the medical system a lot. I have folks who meet that same definition, who are serviced by the paramedics from Fire Station 63 in Venice. 70-80% of their calls are transient-related frequent flyers. What I had been proposing is that we buy into the program in such a way that our paramedics at either a certain fire station for a pilot or more broadly can be a portal into that program just as the county medical clinics are. So for me, I'm seeing the same savings because I've got firefighters who are going out on calls constantly. So to me, I see that there is a savings. I'm further concerned that we're not part of this program because I am aware of permanent supportive housing projects on the west side that have had their services provided or their funding in part from this program. So I've got folks being housed on the west side that can't come from the west side because they haven't gone through the county clinic.
So I think that from a societal cost avoidance perspective, even if you held aside all of our moral arguments for housing people who are homeless, there is an economic impact, and there's a public expenditure impact in the kinds of services that you were talking about. There's a public expenditure impact in, net economic downside to homeless. There are a number of different reasons why we should house the homeless. The challenge that I believe led to not committing permanent housing resources into this pool was the open-ended nature of the commitment. You're not committing for this year. It was similar to the discussion that we just had with regard to long-term commitments. Once you're paying someone's rent, you're on the hook for the rent for the rest of their tenancy, and the tenancy is open-ended. Now, I think one of the things that I think is really exciting about the entrance of the Department of Health Services into this space and their willingness to work with a variety of different kinds of funding structures is that they have made a commitment to pay for the supportive service level if a municipality will bring in the long-term rental assistance. So they've offered that out to any of the housing authorities in the county of Los Angeles. If you bring us a voucher, we'll pay for the services. It doesn't have to be one of our frequent flyers. I think that's an extremely appealing offer because what the city has is access to some turnover in Section 8 vouchers. What other public housing authorities have in the county is some level of turnover. So I think the ability of DHS, the willingness of DHS to commit that resource, which is the supportive services, and that's an open-ended commitment, would more than justify the commitment of some stream of turnover. When I was at HACLA, we made that kind of a commitment. We worked with DHS to commit those kinds of resources, both with DHS and with Department of Mental Health. I think the challenge with paying a rental subsidy is that you're on the hook budget cycle in or budget cycle out, and it's also sort of a fixed resource. Once you help the first person, you're helping that person, and the cost is set on a forward-going basis. So the question that I have is, if you can make that kind of a long-term rental commitment, open-ended 15 years or whatever it happens to be, that's it. Then that's the kind of commitment that you're signing on for with this program. I'm not suggesting that you don't also have a cost avoidance question. The question I think that is incumbent on participation in this program is what's the time horizon of the financial commitment that you're putting out, and I think that's where aligning with federal resources like the former Shelter Plus Care program or a Section 8 voucher makes a great deal of sense. I think that's where accessing other deep housing subsidy programs like Section 202 or Section 811 housing would make great sense for combining with these programs. Where I think that city general funds, especially sort of one-time commitment general funds, is really problematic for a program that has an open-ended time horizon.
Well, everything we've done with $138 million this year is one-time funds. None of that is going towards permanent supportive housing?
So the infrastructure to place people into permanent supportive housing, but it's not picking up a permanent supportive housing rental assistance. So the rental assistance administer through LASA is of a shorter duration. Our public housing agencies administer the federal contracts for, what was called shelter plus care. Those have an open-ended, rental assistance commitment. Our Section 8 vouchers do the same. But long-term rental assistance is not something that the city's on the hook for in these grants.
All right, so let me do this. It's unacceptable to me that I can have housing built on the west side that folks from the west side can't get into. And that is conceivable if the way it's getting done is in partnership with the county flexible housing subsidy pool. So I hear what you're saying. I hear what you're saying about the nature of the one-time funding. What I would like you and LASA to do is come up with a proposal by which we can find some way to buy into or leverage into the flexible housing subsidy program, because that program is successful, that program is growing, others are going to start buying into it, and there has to be a way to get some of folks who are frequent users of LA County or LA City, LAFD paramedics into the system. So you were talking about ways to partner with the flexible housing subsidy pool. I'd like LASA to come back to me or to this committee with a proposal in the next 60 days, how we might be able to do that. Is that doable?
Okay. Yeah, it certainly is. And I would just want to reiterate that there are sort of two layers to this. One is where they're paying the rent, and one is where they're paying the supportive services. And I think the supportive service commitment is one that is readily accessible to the city through this program, and that you wouldn't be on the hook for the long-term rent. So we'll be happy to report back on how that would work.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Excellent. Mr. Price, anything else? Excellent. So we'll note and file this matter, and thank you. We have General Jeff as a commenter on item number 4.
Thank you, committee. I want to first thank this committee for bringing this issue up because no disrespect to Mr. Lynn, but I've had my concerns with LASA's day-to-day operations for many, many years now. Ever since I've been a community activist in Skid Row, almost 10 years now. There needs to be some type of better oversight attached to what it is that they do. Just giving out vouchers is not enough. To give out vouchers in the limited direction of permanent supportive housing, what about vouchers for transitional housing and many, many other ways? We need housing first, more housing stock. Without housing, the vouchers are worthless. And so you've got a lot of homeless people that are competing for a limited housing stock that doesn't exist. And so, there are many, many other questions. Clearly, I don't have enough time to get into them all, but you will hear from me soon. But thank you for keeping this up. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Is there any further business, Mr. Clerk?
The desk is clear, Mr. Chair.
Excellent. With that, we're adjourned. Thank you.